came to our community in my 20s, helped grow a business, which eventually became a few $100 million enterprise with a couple hundred employees in my community. But it wasn't the number of jobs. It wasn't the size of the business that really mattered to me. What really mattered to me as a young entrepreneur and businesswoman was making sure that the quality of those jobs was really, really fine, and making sure, as we mentioned, that everyone had health care and families included, making sure that we were focused on family leave as an example, or 40 hours of community service for folks to be able to have to use for whatever they thought was important in the community. Nursing rooms at work, and 5% of our profits went to education-based philanthropic efforts, because we really knew that it was important to take care of the folks who were buying our clothes. It was a basketball apparel and footwear company that I was working with. Rather than worrying about whether or not they could be professional ball players, we were worried about whether or not the people who wore our clothes were able to have a good education. And so as a businesswoman, you can do a lot of things to make sure that you're growing not only your company and your bottom line, but that you're growing your community, that you're benefiting the employees that your team members are part of, that you're benefiting your environment as well. And I think that that's possible to do. And I think that we need to encourage businesses to be able to do that and to be able to flourish in our communities. Similarly with education, kind of firsthand experience about what it is that's really broken about our education system, and many of the things that we need to be worried about to fix that education system. It's a very, very complicated ecosystem, education is. It's not just about the teachers, but it's about a lot of other moving parts in terms of the health of kids, in terms of their access to food, as an example. All of those things are playing into whether or not kids are successful. And all of those things I feel as though I kind of have firsthand experience understanding, and I think they'd be very beneficial on our behalf in Congress. I think Congress is sadly, relatively speaking, monolithic in the background and experience of a lot of the people who serve there. I think that they really could use some diversity in Congress of people who have things such as a business background, or as I do, or maybe such as a background in serving and protecting our country as I do, or maybe a background in education as well. I think all of those things would be useful in Washington.
So you just mentioned serving your country, and one of the issues you list as a priority on your website is supporting veterans. Can you talk a little more about that? I feel like this is the kind of thing that everybody sort of says, like, oh, we should support veterans better. But it seems like support for veterans in really concrete ways seems to be diminishing in the current administration. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what are the kinds of supports that you think that veterans could really use, and what are the ways that the government could be providing that better? So
this issue honestly couldn't be more personal and important to me. In addition to the fact that I served active duty in the Air Force, I am actually third generation military myself. My father was a career naval officer. My grandfather was a career naval officer, and I have 4 cousins who are currently active duty, and many of them are serving overseas as you and I are talking right now. Service to veterans and to service members and to the families of veterans and service members is very, very personal to me. And so when I talk about these issues, they are not just platitudes and empty words. I think that we need to make sure that we're not only taking care of people, veterans specifically, who are coming out of the backside of service in terms of the consequences of that time that they've spent doing the thing that's most important, honoring and serving our country. But we also need to be talking about making sure that we're supporting them when they're active duty, and that we're supporting their families, both when those families are active duty as well as when those families are no longer serving actively as veterans effectively. And so a lot of the programs that I think I'd like to be helpful in supporting, having been an active duty member myself, I know exactly what the challenges are. I'll give you an example. One of the bigger reasons why I got out of the military was I had my first child. My first child was born, and I had 6 weeks of maternity leave. My base child care did not accept children until they were 6 months old. The assumption was that the active duty member would be able to go back to work. Well, in this particular case, the active duty member was a woman. My husband was not able to take off time until the base was able to take care and help me with my child. Those are specific issues that I would have really benefited from, would be able to be maybe helpful in when I'm active duty. Another example is making sure that we're tending people when they get out of the military with mental health issues. Also could not be more important to me in terms of making sure that we're taking care of that. But the final thing that I would emphasize is families. I think that we talk a great deal appropriately about active duty members and veterans, but we also should be talking just as much about their families, because their families are just as much a part of the solution as the active duty and veteran member is, and just as much need to be tended for and cared for.
So I really liked your story about how, you had personally experienced having to go back to work and not having childcare. I had a similar situation. I am the breadwinner in my family, but I did not have any paid leave. And so my husband stays home now with our son. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about paid family and medical leave and sort of your position on it and the sorts of things that you would do, in regards to paid family leave if elected.
So I am absolutely for paid family leave and other kinds of leave as well for medical issues. As I mentioned, at And One, the company that I helped grow in our community in the 90s and early 2000s, we were pretty much on the cutting edge in Pennsylvania, and I think in the country as a whole, in terms of offering extended leave for both fathers and mothers, opportunities for everybody to have a chance to take some time at things like the birth of a child. It was really important to us to be able to provide that opportunity, and that wasn't because it was a law, it was because it was right to do. And so I'm very much a proponent of that. I also, when I very first had my first child, served on something called the Child Care Development Center board. And basically what that was a board that was talking about exactly these issues, which is it's really fairly broken that a person can work full-time and effectively work basically for their child care. And that was the position that I was in when I was up in Boston as a graduate student. I had a choice of either going to graduate school and finding ways to go into even further into debt with my 1-year-old at the time, or not going to graduate school at all. And I was able to figure out a way basically to balance, effectively, not exaggerating, bringing my 1-year-old to work and having a playpen set up with her at my campus with my on-campus job to be able to afford to go to school and bring my kid to work all at the same time so that I could complete my graduate degree. It's a really big issue, childcare in America, and it's one that we struggle with, particularly women, I think.
I had my kids in the office with me last Friday. It wasn't a pretty picture.
No, I mean, when my newborn, my now 26-year-old was first born, I was in graduate school, and I'm not exaggerating. She was small enough to fit in my desk drawer at school, and I used to bring her in and have her rest in my desk drawer while pregnant with my second child.
My 6 and 3-year-olds, not so much into the fitting into any part of my office.
But, at And One, I think it's really, important. This is a really important conversation. We had the ability to sort of call the shots and, built out the office so that we had a nursing room for moms, so that we had a playroom for kids, so that we had, of course we had a basketball in our office, a court in our office because we were a basketball company, but we also had a playroom. We also had bring your kid to work day. We also had trick-or-treating for kids. We had, all kinds of different activities to make sure that families felt included, because I couldn't have been there and many folks couldn't have been there if they couldn't have brought their kids every day.
Yeah, and that's something that, I think ideally we would love to see the market solve this problem. People talk a lot about the market solving problems, but it's just the case that those things cost money. And so if it's not a priority for the people who own the business, and it's not a priority to get those kind of employees, which often includes women, they're often not going to do it if they don't have to.
Yeah, and so what I'd love to share with you is that I understand where you're coming from, but my experience is sort of the opposite, which is I think that when you build a company that cares for community and the employees and the environment, such as a company like And One, the profits come and the success comes. And I think that, frankly, after our company And One was sold about 12 years ago, the gentleman who purchased it didn't think any of those things were terribly valuable that we're talking about in terms of, kids at work and dogs at work and healthcare and, and community service. He didn't think those things were important, and he pretty quickly tore that out of the organization. And as a consequence, I believe the company suffered and failed. So, in fact, I believe that so strongly. And we believe that so strongly that a bunch of us from that company started another organization that's called the Benefit Corporation Movement, or the B Corp movement. And basically what this movement is exactly what it sounds like. There should be a way as a for-profit business to be able to legally think about more than just your bottom line when you're making decisions. And you should legally be able to consider just what we're talking about, your employees, your community, your environment when you're making those really critical decisions like selling a company or investing. And before this benefit corporation concept kind of came up, that wasn't legal. And now this new company or this new organization came of age as a result of the collapse of the stock market in 2008, also the sale of And One. And now in 37 different states, you can be a benefit corporation. You can decide to incorporate your company if you're a business person as a B Corp instead of as an S Corp or as a C Corp. And that's legal now. So you can choose to be that kind of a company, which is what And One was and what so many other companies across our country are. Ben & Jerry's, Patagonia, Seventh Generation are some big companies that embody those values. But there are many, many, many small companies. And the statistics prove, the data proves that companies that care about their communities and the employee and the environment, that care about something more than just their profits, succeed and make more money and are better for the economy. So I think that things like childcare or extended leave are things that will make a company more successful.
Is there anything else that you would like to make sure that we talk about, you or your background or your campaign?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's remarkable and probably relevant to this conversation that we're having, particularly as it revolves around children and childcare, is that Pennsylvania is the largest state in the nation that has no female representation in Congress right now. And I had no idea when I started, exploring being helpful in this way, that was the dubious distinction that Pennsylvania had. And we are also number 49th in the country in terms of elected women officials, which is also a rather sorry statistic and something that I didn't know a whole lot about. That being said, I'm enormously excited about kind of where we are today in Pennsylvania, how far we've come, not only in the 6th Congressional District, but in others as well. There's just an enormous amount of energy that I think has done nothing but crescendo, elevate, over the last 18 months of time. I think we are working really hard to change our democracy and to change our representation. And all of that to say that there still is very, very much a very close race. And something that I like to convey to people who don't necessarily live in places like mine, in purple places like mine, is that this race is not going to go down without a fight. It's going to be a very, very close race. The person whom I'm running against has been named what's called a young gun, which is the Republican designation for candidates on the Republican side that they'd very much like to protect and they'd like to see succeed. And that to me is an indication that this is by no means over and that this fight needs to be fought all the way to the very last gasp at 8 p.m. on November the 6th. And so I think not only do we obviously need more women in Congress, but I think the diversity issue, as we've talked about through this conversation, is much more multidimensional. We need more veterans. We need more STEM professionals. We need more educators. We need more business people. All of those things we need more of. And so I hope to be part of the solution on all of those dimensions in November. And the last thing that I would add is that I really need help, and so if people would like to follow my campaign, I would welcome them to do that. If you wouldn't mind, please have them check me out at ChrissyHoulahanForCongress.com and get involved. I have a Twitter account, I have Facebook accounts, that sort of thing. And the last thing that I would add is thank you. Thank you for doing this. We are all doing our part. We're all raging against, what it is that we think needs changed. And you guys are just amazing. And I'm just so grateful for the opportunity and the platform to talk to you and to meet you and to be able to elevate our issues with you.
Well, thank you. And we're going to put links to your website and your social media up on our website as well. And I hope listeners will continue the conversation. So this entire week we're devoting to the women of Pennsylvania. So if people didn't listen to our Monday episode yet, we talked to Katie Muth and Danielle Friel-Otten. And on Friday this week, we're talking to Sarah Johnson Rothman and Maria Collett. So we're super excited about women in Pennsylvania this year. I was equally shocked to learn the statistics of there being currently no female representatives. That's just shocking.
It's stunning, and many of those women who you've just named, I'm grateful to say, are now dear friends of mine, people who we've been coordinating with and collaborating with as much as we are able over the last year and a half or so. Those women are fierce and forces, and they are working very, very hard